The cold wind howled through the empty highway, but amidst the darkness, something small and trembling huddled by the roadside. A group of helpless golden retriever puppies, abandoned in the middle of nowhere. Who could leave them like this? Nathan, a former soldier turned mechanic, never expected that stopping his truck that night would unravel a chilling truth, one far worse than he ever imagined. But what he would discover next would change everything. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment and be part of this journey with us. May this story bring warmth to your heart. Now, let's begin. The low hum of Nathan's truck engine was the only sound breaking the eerie stillness of the highway. The mist clung stubbornly to the asphalt, making the road ahead hazy under the dim glow of the streetlights. It was one of those nights where silence felt heavier, almost suffocating, pressing against his chest in a way that reminded him too much of his past. Nathan Whitaker had spent 10 years in the military before settling into the quiet monotony of life in Cedar Hills, a town so small it barely made the maps. He was 36 now, built strong from years of discipline, though his broad shoulders carried more than just the weight of his physique. His dark brown hair was always in disarray, and the lines on his face, deepened by sleepless nights, hinted at burdens he never spoke about. Since leaving the service, he had taken up work as a mechanic, a job that kept his hands busy and his mind from wandering into places he didn't want to revisit. He exhaled, his fingers flexing on the wheel. The drive home was usually his time to unwind, to let the rhythmic motion of the road dull the sharp edges of his thoughts. But tonight, something felt different. As he rounded a bend in the road, his headlights illuminated a cluster of small shapes near the shoulder. His brows furrowed. Trash? No. They were moving. His grip tightened as he slowed the truck, hazard lights flashing as he pulled over. The air outside was sharp with cold, the fine mist clinging to his skin as he stepped onto the damp asphalt. He approached cautiously, his boots crunching against the gravel, and then he saw them. Puppies. 6 tiny golden retriever puppies, soaked to the bone, huddled together in a pitiful heap. Their golden fur, normally fluffy and soft, clung to their frail bodies, darkened by dirt and moisture. Their eyes, wide and fearful, darted between Nathan and the empty darkness beyond the road, their tiny bodies trembling from cold and exhaustion. His chest tightened. Where was their mother? Nathan's eyes swept the surroundings, searching for any sign of an adult dog, a box, anything that suggested how they got here. But there was nothing. Just the wet pavement stretching endlessly in both directions, the woods standing silent beyond the road. The realization made something deep inside him coil with anger. Somebody had left them here. He crouched down, moving slowly so as not to startle them. One of the puppies, smaller than the rest, lay apart from the group, its body alarmingly still. His fingers brushed over its tiny frame. The little one shivered but barely reacted, its breaths weak and uneven. Nathan swallowed hard. He knew what would happen if he left them here. The cold would take them before morning. "Hey, it's okay," he murmured, his voice low and steady. "You're safe now." The puppies didn't move, but their eyes locked onto him, hesitant but desperate. Carefully he reached out, scooping the weakest one into his arms. The puppy barely stirred, its head resting limply against his chest. The others flinched at his movement, but he didn't have time to coax them one by one. He needed to get them warm, fast. He grabbed his flannel jacket from the passenger seat of the truck, laying it open before gently placing each puppy inside. One of them, slightly bigger, with a deep amber tint in its fur, let out a small whimper, but didn't resist as Nathan bundled them together. The smallest one, the one he had picked up first, let out a barely audible sigh as it nestled into the warmth of the fabric. That sound nearly broke him. He took one last glance around the empty highway, still holding on to the faint hope that their mother might appear, that this was all some mistake. But there was nothing but the low whistle of the wind against the trees. Clenching his jaw, he carefully lifted the bundled puppies and carried them to the truck. He set them down on the passenger seat, adjusting his jacket to wrap around them fully. The smallest one, still struggling, let out another soft noise, barely more than a breath. Nathan's fingers hovered over its tiny head for a moment before he settled into the driver's seat. His heart was pounding in a way it hadn't in years. He had seen suffering before. He had seen things that left scars far deeper than the ones on his skin. But this was a different kind of cruelty. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. He needed to get them help. Without another second of hesitation, he pulled back onto the road, heading towards Cedar Hills. He had no idea what he had just gotten himself into. The truck's tires crunched against the gravel as Nathan pulled into his driveway. The rain had lessened to a fine drizzle, but the cold clung stubbornly to the night. His house, a modest one-story structure tucked away at the edge of Cedar Hills, was barely illuminated by the lone porch light that flickered every so often. He killed the engine, exhaling as he turned toward the passenger seat where the bundled puppies lay. They were quiet now, though whether it was exhaustion or fear, he wasn't sure. The smallest one, the one he had instinctively scooped up first, barely stirred. Nathan carefully unwrapped his flannel jacket, adjusting it so the damp fabric wouldn't cling to their tiny bodies. The golden fur of the puppies, though matted and dirty, was unmistakable in the dim glow of the interior light. Gathering the bundle in his arms, he stepped out, kicking the door shut behind him. The house was eerily silent as he nudged the front door open with his shoulder. He rarely had guests, and the space reflected that. Practical, functional, and devoid of warmth. A battered couch sat against the far wall, a coffee table covered in scattered papers and the occasional wrench or screwdriver. A fireplace that hadn't been used in months loomed in the corner, its hearth cold. The place smelled faintly of oil and metal, a mechanic's home through and through. Nathan made his way to the small laundry room, where a thick pile of clean towels sat stacked near the dryer. He lowered the puppies onto the floor, quickly grabbing a towel to start drying them off. The smallest one, Brave, he decided, barely reacted as he wrapped it in a dry cloth, its breathing shallow. His fingers moved carefully, checking each tiny body for any obvious injuries. One by one, he studied them. Sunny, the most active of the bunch, had slightly lighter fur than the others and was already shifting restlessly, nosing at his siblings. Clover, a pup with a small white patch on its forehead, blinked up at him with wide, uncertain eyes. Echo let out a tiny whimper when he touched its paw, curling into a ball. Maple, slightly larger than the others, had fur with deeper reddish undertones and huddled against Sunny for warmth. Halo, the last of the group, was distinguishable by a barely noticeable nick in one ear, its body rising and falling steadily with each breath. Then there was Brave. Nathan's chest tightened as he examined the smallest pup more closely. Unlike the others, Brave's fur was darker, its body frailer, ribs faintly visible beneath the damp curls of golden fluff. But it wasn't just the thinness that concerned him, it was the wound. A deep, raw cut on the pup's hind leg, barely scabbed over, as though it had been inflicted not long ago. His jaw tightened. That wasn't an accident. Nathan had seen enough injuries, both human and animal, to recognize when something wasn't natural. A scrape from a rough surface, a bruise from a fall. Those he understood. But this wound, it was precise, deliberate, almost as if someone had cut the poor creature. A slow, simmering anger curled in his chest. He reached for his phone, fingers moving with practiced efficiency as he scrolled through his contacts until he found the one person who might have answers. Lena Carter. The call rang twice before a tired but sharp voice answered. Nathan? Lena, I need you to look at something. There was a pause. At this hour? I wouldn't call if it wasn't important. His voice was gruff, but there was a note of urgency that made Lena sigh on the other end. Give me 10 minutes. Nathan exhaled, glancing down at Brave, who remained still in the towel. Thanks. He hung up and set the phone aside, then rose to prepare something for the pups to eat. His kitchen was as unremarkable as the rest of the house, clean but impersonal, with little more than the essentials. He filled a shallow bowl with lukewarm water and retrieved a carton of milk, improvising a makeshift meal for them. By the time he returned, some of the puppies had begun to stir more actively. Sunny was already trying to wobble toward the edge of the towel pile, nose twitching. Nathan set the bowl down carefully, watching as the stronger pups cautiously sniffed at the liquid before lapping at it hesitantly. Brave, however, made no move. A firm knock on the front door broke the silence. Nathan strode over, unlocking it with a swift motion. Lena Carter stood on the doorstep, bundled in a thick coat over her scrubs, her hazel eyes sharp even in the dim porch light. She was tall, lean, with a face that bore the marks of long nights and too many worries. Her hair, usually pulled back into a neat ponytail, had strands falling loose around her face. She wasn't one for unnecessary pleasantries, and Nathan respected that about her. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, shaking off the cold as she gave him a look. "Where are they?" "Back here." He led her to the laundry room, where the puppies remained nestled in the pile of towels. Lena crouched down, her experienced hands moving gently as she examined them one by one. Nathan waited as she worked, her brow furrowing when she reached Brave. She turned the pup carefully, her expression darkening as she spotted the wound. "This wasn't an accident," she said flatly. "I figured as much." Nathan crossed his arms, his jaw tight. "Can you tell how it happened?" Lena was silent for a moment, studying the injury. "It's not a bite. Too clean, too deliberate. Could be a knife or—" She hesitated, glancing at him. "Wire." Nathan felt a slow, controlled rage settle into his bones. Lena continued, voice quieter now. "There are faint rope burns on some of the others. Not deep, but enough to suggest they were tied up at some point." She met his gaze. "Nathan, these puppies weren't just abandoned. Someone restrained them, hurt them, and then dumped them like trash." He didn't respond immediately, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. Lena straightened, brushing off her knees. "The wound on Brave needs antibiotics. I have some at the clinic. I'll come back in the morning to check on them properly, but for now, clean it, keep them warm, and try to get some fluids into the little one. He's weak, but he might pull through if we're careful." Nathan nodded once, the tension in his shoulders not easing. Lena sighed, softening just slightly. "Look, I know that look. You're trying to figure out who did this, but right now, focus on them. They need you." He exhaled sharply, glancing down at Brave, still barely responsive. "Yeah," he muttered. "I know." Lena gave him a lingering look before heading toward the door. "I'll be back first thing." Nathan watched as she left, the night swallowing her figure as she disappeared down the porch steps. He stood in silence for a moment before turning back to the puppies, his gaze lingering on Brave. Something about this didn't sit right with him. This wasn't just a case of neglect. It was something worse. And for the first time in a long time, Nathan felt a familiar pull in his chest, the same feeling he'd had in the military, right before uncovering something that didn't want to be found. He had no idea what he had just stumbled into. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth as the mist slowly lifted from the roadsides. The sun was barely up, casting a weak golden glow over Cedar Hills, but Nathan was already awake, the weight of last night's discovery pressing heavily on his chest. The puppies had made it through the night. Brave was still weak, but at least he was breathing steadily. That was a small relief. Yet, as Nathan brewed a pot of coffee in his cramped kitchen, he knew this wasn't over. Someone had deliberately hurt them, and he wasn't the kind of man to turn a blind eye. By the time Lena pulled up in her old blue Jeep outside his house, he was already ready. She stepped out, dressed in her usual jeans and a thick brown jacket over her scrubs, her dark blonde ponytail slightly messy, evidence of another night with little sleep. She was a woman who carried exhaustion well, always too focused on what needed to be done to let weariness slow her down. Though she was in her 40s, there was something hardened in her features, a kind of quiet determination, shaped by years of working with animals that couldn't tell her where it hurt. Nathan walked out, the door creaking behind him. "You sure you're up for this?" Lena shot him a look, her hazel eyes sharp. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." That was Lena, straightforward, no nonsense. Without another word, they got into his truck, and he pulled onto the road, heading back toward the stretch of highway where he had found the puppies. The drive was silent at first, the tension between them thick with unspoken concerns. It wasn't just about the puppies, it was about what this meant. "I don't like this," Lena finally muttered, crossing her arms. "People abandon animals all the time, but this, the injuries, the way they were dumped in the middle of nowhere, it doesn't add up." Nathan gripped the wheel tighter. "That's why we're going back. Something's off." 15 minutes later, they reached the spot. The damp earth still bore the faint marks of where the puppies had huddled together last night. The road was empty, stretching in both directions, with only the occasional car speeding by in the distance. Nathan stepped out first, scanning the area. It looked just as deserted as before, but as he walked toward the shoulder, something caught his eye. Near the grass, half covered in mud, was a torn plastic bag. He crouched, carefully pulling it up. The thin material was ripped down one side, but there were strands of fur clinging to the inside. Golden fur. Lena frowned, stepping closer. That's a bad sign. Nathan nodded grimly. They were dumped in this. His eyes moved across the ground, searching for more, and that's when he saw it. A length of rope, frayed and snapped at one end, tangled in the grass a few feet away. He picked it up, running a hand over the fibers. It wasn't just cut. It was pulled apart like something or someone had broken free. His gut twisted. They were tied up before they were dumped. Lena didn't respond immediately, but her expression darkened. She crouched near the edge of the grass, pressing her fingers against the damp soil. "Look at this." Nathan followed her gaze. There were faint impressions in the dirt, almost invisible, but with just enough detail to be concerning. Footprints. Human footprints, leading away from the highway and into the woods beyond. A cold realization settled over him. Whoever left the puppies here hadn't just tossed them from a car. They had been here, on foot, moving toward the forest. Lena stood up, brushing her hands off on her jacket. This wasn't just someone too lazy to take their unwanted litter to a shelter. Whoever did this wanted to get rid of them without being seen. Nathan's mind worked quickly, piecing it together, which means they had something to hide. The woods loomed ahead, dense and shadowed even in daylight. Nathan had spent enough years navigating dangerous territory to know when something felt off. The tracks leading inside weren't fresh, but they were there. Whoever had walked this path had come recently. His instinct screamed at him to find out more. "I'm going in," he said. Lena grabbed his arm before he could take another step. "Nathan, hold on. We don't know what's back there." He turned to her, his expression hard. "That's exactly why I need to check." She exhaled sharply, but after a beat, she let go. "Fine, but we do this smart. No running in blind." They moved carefully, stepping past the first few layers of trees. The underbrush was thick, branches clawing at their jackets, but the footprints continued, deeper into the forest, disappearing into the uneven ground. It was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of birds and small animals notably absent. And then Nathan saw it, a structure partially hidden between the trees. At first, it looked like nothing more than a hunting shack, the kind that had been abandoned for years, but as they moved closer, details became clearer. The walls were weathered, but the door had fresh scratches, deep gouges that looked like something, or someone, had tried to claw their way out. Lena inhaled sharply beside him. "What the hell is this?" Nathan's jaw clenched. He stepped forward, pushing lightly on the door. It didn't budge. It was locked. He exchanged a glance with Lena before circling around the side of the shack. A small window sat at eye level, the glass coated with grime. He wiped at it with his sleeve, peering inside. The sight made his stomach drop. The inside was cluttered with metal cages, empty, but stained with old rust and something darker. A pile of discarded rope sat in the corner, alongside a stack of old feed bags. And then there were the scratches, not just on the door, but along the inside walls, desperate, frenzied marks left behind by something trapped and desperate to escape. Nathan stepped back, his pulse hammering. "This isn't just some abandoned shed," he muttered. Lena's voice was tight. "Nathan, we need to call the cops." He barely heard her. His mind was already racing, trying to make sense of what they had found. The rope, the scratches, the way the puppies had been left behind. Someone had been keeping animals here, and not in any way that suggested they were cared for. Lena didn't argue. She pulled out her phone, her fingers moving swiftly. "I know the sheriff personally. I'll get him out here." Nathan's gaze flickered back to the locked shack. Whoever had been here had left their mark, and something told him that whatever had happened inside those walls was just the beginning. As Lena spoke into the phone, her voice steady but urgent, Nathan took one last glance at the footprints leading away from the shed. Whoever did this was still out there, and he intended to find them. The morning sun barely filtered through the thick canopy of trees as Nathan and Lena pushed deeper into the forest. The further they walked, the more the sounds of civilization faded behind them, replaced by the eerie silence of the woods. The air was damp, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and wet earth, and the narrow trail they followed was uneven, the ground still soft from the previous night's rain. Nathan moved with the quiet efficiency of someone trained to navigate unfamiliar terrain. His time in the military had sharpened his instincts. His eyes scanned the surroundings automatically, looking for disturbances in the underbrush, anything that suggested movement. Beside him, Lena kept pace, her expression tense but focused. The footprints they had discovered near the highway had led them here, deeper than Nathan had expected. Whoever had walked this path had done so deliberately, knowing the area well. And then, just ahead, the trees thinned, revealing something partially hidden among the branches. It was a cabin. The structure was small and neglected, its wooden walls worn and weather-stained, the roof sagging slightly at one end. A crude porch jutted out at the front, its planks warped and cracked. Vines crawled up the sides, half concealing broken windows that were either boarded up or shattered. There was an unsettling stillness to the place, as if it had been abandoned long ago, and yet something about it felt recent, lived in, even if only for a dark purpose. Lena exhaled sharply, wiping a stray strand of hair from her forehead. This isn't some hunting lodge. Look at the windows. Someone went through the trouble of covering them up. Nathan nodded grimly, stepping closer. The door, though slightly off its hinges, was locked, not with an old rusted latch, but a new heavy-duty padlock. His gut tightened. People didn't secure abandoned cabins like this unless they had something to hide. Lena moved toward the side of the structure, her sharp hazel eyes scanning the ground. "There's something here," she murmured. Nathan followed her gaze. Just beneath the window, half buried in the dirt, was a thick chain, rusted but sturdy, with its broken end still locked around a metal anchor embedded into the ground. His stomach churned. Chains weren't meant for securing a building. They were meant for restraining something. His fingers traced the links, his jaw tightening. "This was used to hold a dog," he muttered, more to himself than to Lena. She crouched beside him, brushing away the dirt with her hands. "Not just one," she said, pointing to faint scratches in the wood at the cabin's base. Long, desperate claw marks ran up the side, as if some terrified creature had tried to dig its way inside, or escape. Nathan felt a slow simmering anger build in his chest. He knew cruelty. He had seen it on battlefields, had witnessed what humans were capable of when they abandoned their morality. But this, the thought of defenseless animals being kept here, chained, caged, discarded, ignited something in him that was different from any battlefield rage. He turned back toward the door. "We need to get inside." Lena gave him a look. "Breaking in isn't exactly legal, Nathan." He didn't look at her as he reached for his knife, a sturdy military-grade blade he still carried out of habit, and jammed it between the latch and the door frame. Neither is torturing animals. The lock resisted at first, but with enough force, it gave way with a sharp snap. The door groaned as he pushed it open. The stench hit them immediately. It was a mix of old urine, damp wood, and something metallic. Blood. The air inside was heavy with it, thick and suffocating. Lena gagged slightly, pulling the sleeve of her jacket up to cover her nose. Nathan stepped inside first. His boots creaked against the warped wooden floor as he swept his gaze around the dimly lit interior. The cabin wasn't just abandoned. It had been used. Recently. The walls were lined with metal cages, some stacked on top of each other. The bars were bent in places, rusted and stained with something dark. Straw and dirt littered the floor, some patches discolored in a way that made Nathan's stomach churn. Lena moved toward one of the cages, her hands gripping the bars. "These aren't pet crates," she murmured. "They're holding cells." Nathan's eyes landed on the back wall. Deep gouges marred the wooden planks, some reaching nearly a foot high. Scratches, frantic and wild, made by desperate claws. He stepped closer, running his fingers over them. Lena's voice was tight. This was a fighting den. Nathan had already come to the same conclusion. The chains outside, the reinforced windows, the way the cages were positioned. This wasn't just some backwoods kennel. It was a training ground for something much darker. Lena swallowed hard, her voice dropping lower. "These aren't just for keeping dogs. They're for breaking them." Nathan clenched his fists. He had seen war. He had seen atrocities. But something about this felt worse, because it was so deeply personal. He had held those puppies in his arms last night, had felt them tremble against him. They were survivors of this place. His hands curled into fists. Lena exhaled sharply, glancing around the room. "Whoever did this left in a hurry," she muttered. "There's still food in some of the bowls." Nathan scanned the dim interior again, his mind racing. "Which means they're coming back." Lena hesitated, then nodded. "We should go. Get the sheriff involved." Nathan should have agreed, should have turned back, taken what they had found to the authorities. But then he spotted something near the far corner of the room. A collar. Black leather, worn but not old, its metal buckle still intact. He stepped closer, his breath slowing. There was a name etched into the leather. Aurora. Nathan stared at it, the pieces snapping together in his mind. Aurora. The mother dog. The one he had found half dead near the bridge. She had been here. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Aurora had escaped from this place. And she had tried to save her puppies. Lena stepped beside him, her expression unreadable. Lena exhaled slowly. The ones that survive, those are the real fighters. The ones that don't, she didn't finish. Nathan gritted his teeth. The puppies had been dumped because they weren't strong enough. They weren't worth training. A slow, simmering rage built inside him, colder than anything he had felt before. He had seen war, had fought in places where humanity was a distant memory. But this, hurting the innocent, the defenseless, was a different kind of evil. His fingers tightened around the collar. Lena glanced at him. "Nathan?" He exhaled sharply, forcing himself to focus. This wasn't over, not even close. Nathan tightened his grip on the leather collar in his hand, his mind racing with questions. The name Aurora was etched into the worn leather, a silent testament to the suffering the mother dog had endured. She had been here. She had fought to escape. And if she had survived, she had to be somewhere out there, still searching for her puppies. His jaw clenched as he exhaled sharply, the weight of the realization pressing down on him. Lena, standing beside him in the dimly lit cabin, studied his expression carefully. "Nathan, if she made it out, she won't have gone far," she said, her voice steady but laced with quiet urgency. "She's injured, weak, and scared. She's not just running, she's hiding." Nathan nodded. He knew that. If Aurora had fought her way free from this nightmare, she wouldn't be running aimlessly. She would be trying to survive. They left the cabin, retracing their steps back through the thick underbrush until they reached Nathan's truck. The morning had grown warmer, the mist lifting from the trees, but the heaviness in Nathan's chest didn't lessen. He climbed into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel tightly as he ran through possible locations in his mind. Injured dogs, especially ones with a maternal instinct, sought shelter. Somewhere quiet, somewhere concealed, somewhere close to where they had last felt safe. Lena pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts. "I know someone who might have seen her," she murmured. Nathan cast her a glance. "Who?" "Bill Hendricks." She put the phone to her ear. "He's been driving long-haul routes through Cedar Hills for years. He pays attention to things other people ignore." Nathan didn't argue. A few minutes later, Lena had Bill on speakerphone. "Lena," came the gruff voice on the other end, laced with the exhaustion of someone who had spent too many nights on the road. "Didn't expect to hear from you this early." "I need your help," Lena said, wasting no time. "Last night, did you see any stray dogs near the highway?" There was a pause. Then, Bill exhaled. "Yeah, matter of fact, I did. Big one, golden retriever, looked like she'd been through hell. She ran across Route 7, near that old service station. Almost didn't see her in the dark." Nathan's pulse quickened. "Did she have pups with her?" Bill hesitated. "Didn't get a good look. She was moving fast, but not like a dog running for fun. She was desperate, I could tell." Nathan exchanged a look with Lena. "Thanks, Bill. That's all we needed." Nathan hung up before Bill could say anything else and threw the truck into gear. Route 7 wasn't far. If Aurora had been seen last night, she wouldn't have made it far. And if she was as weak as Nathan suspected, she wouldn't have traveled much since then. The drive took less than 10 minutes, but every second felt longer than it should have. The old service station Bill had mentioned was barely standing, a rusted-out, abandoned relic from another decade, its faded sign barely legible. The gas pumps were gone, leaving nothing but cracked concrete and overgrown weeds. But behind it was the real search area, the woods, the drainage ditches, the old bridge that spanned the shallow creek. Nathan and Lena got out, scanning the area carefully. The road was quiet, the occasional truck passing in the distance, but otherwise there were no immediate signs of movement. Nathan crouched near the edge of the bridge, examining the dirt. Footprints, not human, paw prints. His chest tightened. She had been here. He followed the trail carefully, his boots pressing into the damp earth. The creek below was barely a trickle, but the embankment was steep, overgrown with brambles and thick grass. And then he saw it. A flash of gold beneath the bridge. Nathan moved faster now, stepping carefully down the incline. The closer he got, the more he could make out the shape curled beneath the shelter of the concrete support beams. Aurora. She was thin, painfully so, her golden fur matted with dirt and dried blood. Her ribs jutted out beneath her fragile frame, her breath coming in short, ragged pants. But even in her weakened state, she lifted her head, her deep brown eyes locked onto him with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. And then Nathan saw why she hadn't left. Nestled against her stomach, partially buried in the grass, were two tiny golden retriever puppies. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. They were so small, smaller than the ones he had rescued last night. They couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, their tiny bodies barely moving. Aurora had been trying to protect them, but she was too weak to keep going. Lena knelt beside him, her expression softening. She didn't leave them behind, she murmured. She couldn't. Nathan swallowed hard. He understood that instinct. Slowly he extended his hand toward Aurora. "Hey, girl," he said softly, his voice calm despite the storm raging in his chest. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." Aurora flinched but didn't growl. She was too exhausted to fight. Nathan carefully removed his jacket, placing it over the pups first, shielding them from the cold air. Then he reached toward Aurora again, moving with patience. His fingers brushed against her fur, and she shuddered, but didn't pull away. "You've been through hell," he murmured, feeling the delicate bones beneath her coat. She had fought for so long, and she was barely hanging on. Lena reached for a bottle of water from her bag, unscrewing the cap before slowly tilting a small amount into her palm. She held it toward Aurora, who hesitated before finally, weakly, lapping at the liquid. It wasn't enough to save her, but it was enough to tell them she hadn't given up yet. Nathan carefully scooped up the two puppies, wrapping them gently in his jacket. Their tiny bodies were warmer than he expected, but still weak, their fur damp and tangled. Then he turned back to Aurora. "She's not going to be able to walk back," Lena murmured. Nathan nodded grimly. Without hesitation, he lifted Aurora into his arms. She barely resisted, her head resting against his chest, her breath shallow but steady. As he carried her up the embankment, the weight of her frail body against him, he felt something shift inside him. Aurora had survived against all odds. She had fought, suffered, escaped, and she had come back for her babies. She wasn't just a victim. She was a fighter. Nathan glanced down at the fragile, battle-worn dog in his arms, then at the two puppies curled in his jacket. "Aurora," he said softly, giving her the name she had nearly lost. Because even after everything, she was still here, and she was still shining. Nathan drove with one hand firm on the wheel, the other resting protectively over his jacket, where the two fragile golden retriever puppies lay nestled against each other. Aurora was sprawled across the passenger seat, her body motionless, except for the slow, uneven rise and fall of her ribs. Her fur was dirty and matted, her breathing weak. Every now and then, a faint tremor passed through her body, as if even in sleep she was still fighting. Lena sat in the back seat, her gaze shifting constantly between the puppies and Aurora. She was typically level-headed, but today, tension creased her features. Her sharp hazel eyes, usually filled with quiet determination, were now clouded with concern. She had been a veterinarian for years, had seen all kinds of cases, from strays hit by cars to animals abused beyond recognition. But something about this case was different. Maybe it was the deliberate cruelty behind it, or maybe it was the way Nathan had become involved, his usual distant nature cracking under the weight of something more personal. As they pulled up to Carter Veterinary Clinic, a small, well-kept building at the edge of town, Lena was already reaching for the door handle before the truck had fully stopped. She hurried inside, flipping on the bright, sterile overhead lights as Nathan carefully lifted Aurora into his arms, carrying her as if she might break at any moment. The puppies, still wrapped in his jacket, let out soft whimpers but didn't struggle. Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic and fresh linens. The walls were lined with shelves stocked with medical supplies, and the air held the faint hum of machinery. Lena led the way to the back, where an examination table awaited. She moved quickly, years of experience kicking in as she prepared an IV line, grabbing gauze, antiseptic, and a blanket from a nearby cabinet. Nathan gently laid Aurora down, and the moment her body touched the cool metal surface, she let out a weak, almost silent whimper. His chest tightened. She was barely holding on. Lena moved with quick efficiency, checking her pulse, lifting her eyelids, running her fingers gently over her emaciated frame. She's severely dehydrated, malnourished. Her blood pressure's weak, she murmured, more to herself than to him. Then she met his gaze. She's shutting down, Nathan. The words hit harder than he expected. Lena inserted the IV needle into Aurora's leg, securing it before attaching a bag of fluids. Nathan watched as the liquid slowly dripped down the line, hoping it was enough to pull her back from the edge. The room was silent except for the rhythmic beep of the monitor. Then, without looking up from her work, Lena asked, "Have you ever lost anyone like this?" Nathan stiffened. The question was unexpected. He exhaled through his nose, his jaw tightening. Yes, too many. But he didn't say that. Instead, he muttered, "I've seen fighters who kept going even when they had no reason to." Lena nodded as if she understood. Maybe she did. She had lost her younger brother in a car accident years ago, an event that had changed her forever. Before that, she had been softer, more open. Now, she carried her grief differently, through action, through an almost relentless drive to save what she could. Aurora stirred slightly, her nose twitching. Nathan's eyes snapped to her face. It was subtle, but it was something. Lena noticed too. "She's still in there," she murmured. "We just have to give her a reason to come back." Nathan reached out, resting a hand gently on Aurora's side. Beneath the dirty, tangled fur, he could feel her slow heartbeat. Faint, but steady. The moment was interrupted by the ringing of Lena's phone. She frowned, wiping her hands on her scrubs before answering. "This is Carter," she said briskly. Nathan watched as her expression shifted from exhaustion to alarm in a matter of seconds. "What?" she snapped. Nathan straightened, immediately on alert. Lena's face had gone pale. "Who told you this?" A voice crackled on the other end, muffled but tense. Lena listened, then nodded sharply. "All right, thanks for the heads up." She ended the call and turned to Nathan. "We have a problem." Nathan didn't move. "What kind of problem?" Lena took a breath. "That was Sheriff Calloway's office. One of their deputies was out near the woods this morning and saw a group of men heading back toward the cabin." Nathan's blood ran cold. "They're cleaning up." Lena nodded grimly. "Sheriff thinks they're trying to destroy evidence. If they find out Aurora is alive—" Nathan didn't let her finish. He was already moving, grabbing his jacket, checking his truck keys. Lena stepped in front of him, blocking his way. "Hold on. What are you planning to do? March in there alone?" Nathan's voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge underneath. "If they find out she's here, she won't make it through the night." Lena swallowed, knowing he was right. But the idea of him going back there alone was reckless. "Then let's be smart about this," she said. "We call the sheriff, make sure they handle it." Nathan exhaled sharply, but he forced himself to pause. She was right. This wasn't a war zone. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He nodded once. "Fine. Call him." Lena wasted no time dialing, pacing the room as she spoke quickly. Nathan turned back to Aurora, his fingers resting on her paw. She had to survive. Minutes later, Lena ended the call. "The sheriff is sending 2 deputies out. He wants us to keep Aurora and the puppies somewhere safe, until we know for sure it's clear." Nathan didn't hesitate. "My place?" Lena frowned. "Are you sure?" Nathan nodded. "It's out of the way and no one's watching it." Lena hesitated for only a second before exhaling. "All right, let's move her carefully." They worked quickly, transferring Aurora onto a padded blanket before Nathan lifted her into his arms. She barely reacted, her body limp against him, but she was still breathing. That was enough. For now. They loaded the puppies into a small carrier, and within minutes they were back on the road, heading toward Nathan's house. As he drove, Nathan's grip on the wheel was tight. If the men from the cabin were looking for Aurora, they wouldn't stop, which meant he wouldn't either. The night air was thick, dense with the weight of something impending. Nathan crouched near the tree line, his muscles taut, his eyes locked onto the dark silhouette of the cabin just beyond the clearing. The trees cast long, twisted shadows under the sliver of moonlight, giving the whole scene an eerie stillness, like a moment frozen before a storm. His breath was controlled, his heartbeat steady, but his fingers curled slightly against his knee, a remnant of old instincts honed in battlefields far from here. Beside him, Sheriff Calloway adjusted his radio, speaking in a hushed but firm voice. The sheriff was a man in his late 50s, built like a man who had spent his life wrangling both criminals and cattle. His grizzled face bore the weight of years in law enforcement, deep lines carved into his sun-darkened skin, and a mustache that twitched whenever he was deep in thought. He was the kind of man who didn't waste words, who had seen too much of human nature to believe in easy redemption. His deputies, a younger officer named Ross and a no-nonsense woman in her 40s named Martinez, moved in practiced silence beside them. Ross was fresh to the force, lean with nervous energy, his blonde hair tucked beneath a cap, his blue eyes darting anxiously toward Nathan every few minutes as if trying to read the former soldier's mind. Martinez, on the other hand, was composed, experienced, and carried herself with the weight of someone who had fought her own battles and had no patience for recklessness. Lena was back at Nathan's place, watching over Aurora and the puppies. He trusted her, but the idea of not being there gnawed at him. Yet, if this went wrong, Aurora wouldn't be safe anywhere. The plan was simple. They had received confirmation that the same men who had been using the cabin were coming back, likely to destroy whatever evidence remained. Nathan had seen their work firsthand. These weren't just people trying to make money off dogfighting. There was something colder about them, something that had stripped them of basic humanity. "Got movement?" Martinez murmured. Nathan's gaze snapped toward the dirt road leading up to the cabin. The sound of gravel crunching under tires carried through the stillness. A pair of headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the clearing in sharp flashes as the vehicle maneuvered its way closer. It was an old black pickup truck, dented and worn, but powerful. The kind of vehicle built to carry heavy cargo, or to get away from something fast. The engine hummed low as the truck rolled to a stop just feet away from the padlocked cabin door. Nathan could make out 4 figures inside the truck. Then the doors swung open. The men who stepped out weren't just criminals, they were predators. The first was a stocky man with a buzzed head and a cruel smirk, his arms thick with tattoos that curled like dark tendrils beneath his sleeves. His presence alone radiated arrogance, the confidence of someone who had gotten away with far too much for far too long. Next to him was a taller man, leaner, but with cold, calculating eyes, the kind that assessed situations rather than reacted to them. His face was marked with a long scar that ran from his temple down to his jaw, a reminder of some past violence he had either given or received. The third was younger, barely more than a kid, his face thin and drawn, his movements nervous as he glanced around. He was the kind who probably got pulled into this world without fully understanding what it meant until it was too late. But it was the fourth man that made Nathan's stomach turn. He was older, late 50s or early 60s, his gray hair cropped short, his eyes dead of emotion. He moved with a slow, measured pace, the way men who were utterly sure of their control did. His clothes were clean, pressed, too clean for someone dealing in illegal dogfighting. Nathan had seen men like him before, ones who ordered violence but never got their own hands dirty. These were not just small-time criminals, they were organized. Nathan's hands curled into fists. Calloway exhaled sharply. "We wait until they go inside, then we move in. No sudden moves. We take them alive." Nathan said nothing. He was used to different rules of engagement, but this wasn't a war zone, not yet. The men moved toward the cabin. The bald one pulled out a key, unlocking the heavy padlock with a flick of his wrist. The old door groaned as they stepped inside, their flashlight beams cutting through the dust and darkness. Then Calloway gave the signal. Everything happened fast. The sheriff and his deputies moved as one, emerging from the shadows like ghosts, their weapons raised. Nathan was just behind them, his footsteps silent on the damp ground, his mind already anticipating the next move. "Sheriff's Department! Hands where we can see them!" Calloway's voice boomed through the air. The reaction inside the cabin was immediate. Shouts, scrambling footsteps, the chaotic clatter of objects being overturned. The younger guy panicked first, hands shooting into the air before he even turned around. The scarred man lunged for something in his jacket, but Martinez was faster, her stance solid as she trained her weapon on him. "Don't move!" The bald man cursed, his face twisting with fury as he lunged for the back door. Nathan was already there. The impact of their bodies colliding sent them both crashing into the wooden wall, the force shaking the whole structure. Nathan caught the man's arm as he tried to swing, twisting it sharply, forcing him to drop the knife that had been concealed in his grip. The bald man snarled, trying to pull away, but Nathan yanked him forward, slamming him onto the floor. "Try again," Nathan muttered. The older man, the one who had stood still through it all, watching, finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "This is a mistake." Calloway narrowed his eyes. "The only mistake was thinking you wouldn't get caught." The man smirked, his expression unreadable. "You don't know what you're stepping into." Nathan felt his blood run cold. This wasn't just about dogs. This was bigger than any of them had realized. But for tonight, at least, the battle was won. As the deputies moved in, securing the men in cuffs, Nathan finally stepped back, his breath steadying. It was over. For now. The morning light streamed through the wide windows of Nathan's living room, casting a golden glow across the wooden floors. The air carried the crisp scent of pine from the trees outside, mixed with the faint aroma of coffee from the kitchen. For the first time in years, Nathan felt a rare sense of peace. It had been weeks since that night in the cabin, and everything had changed. Aurora lay curled up in a sunlit corner, her body no longer frail, her golden coat now clean and thick. She had gained weight, her ribs no longer showing beneath her fur, and though she still bore faint scars from her past, she was strong again. She lifted her head at the sound of Nathan moving across the room, her deep brown eyes watching him with something that hadn't been there before: trust. The puppies, once fragile and sickly, had turned into little bundles of boundless energy. Sonny, the liveliest of the litter, had taken to bouncing around the room, his fluffy tail wagging excitedly as he tried to engage his siblings in play. Clover, always observant, sat near the couch, chewing on an old rope toy. Echo, the quietest, was sprawled on his back, content just being close to the others. Maple and Halo, the last of the group, were napping near the fireplace, their tiny bodies curled together. And then there was Brave, the smallest, the weakest, the one who had been closest to death. He still bore the faintest limp from his old injury, but Nathan could see it now, the fight in him. He had survived against impossible odds, and despite everything, he still greeted the world with a quiet resilience that Nathan understood all too well. The past few weeks had been a blur of long nights and endless care. Lena had been by almost every day, ensuring the pups were healthy and Aurora was healing properly. She had worked tirelessly, her usual sharpness giving way to a softer determination when she was with the dogs. Nathan had always known she was tough, but seeing her like this, gentle, patient, unwavering, made him appreciate her in a way he hadn't before. She had given up part of her own life to save these animals, and for that, Nathan would always be grateful. Most of the puppies had found good homes. Families had come, falling in love instantly with their fluffy coats and playful personalities. Sonny had gone to a woman named Rebecca, a school teacher with 2 kids who had been dreaming of a dog for years. Clover had found a home with an older man named Walter, a retired firefighter who had lost his own dog the year before. Echo, quiet and gentle, had been adopted by a young couple looking for their first pet. Maple and Halo had gone together to a farm on the outskirts of town where they would have acres of land to run freely. Nathan had been relieved to see them go to good people, but with each puppy that left, there was an ache in his chest that he couldn't quite explain. But when it came to Brave and Aurora, he didn't even consider letting them go. He had told himself in the beginning that this was temporary, that he was just doing the right thing, stepping in when no one else could. But the truth had settled in slowly, creeping up on him in the quiet moments, when Aurora would nuzzle against his leg after a long day, when Brave would fall asleep curled up beside him, when he realized that his house, once empty and cold, finally felt like home again. Nathan sat down on the couch, his gaze drifting to Aurora. She watched him, then, slowly, deliberately, she rose to her feet and walked toward him. He held his breath as she stopped in front of him, hesitating only for a second before lowering herself onto the floor at his feet. Then, for the first time, she rested her head against his leg. It was such a small thing, a simple, quiet action. But it meant everything. Nathan felt something in his chest loosen, something he hadn't even realized he'd been holding on to. He reached down, running his fingers gently through her fur, feeling the warmth of her body, the steady rhythm of her breathing. She wasn't afraid anymore. For so long, he had been the one saving them. But in the end, it was Aurora, brave, and those tiny, fragile lives he had found on the highway that had saved him. Nathan had spent years believing he was meant to be alone, that the ghosts of his past, the weight of the things he had seen, had made him into someone who couldn't be part of something anymore. But looking down at Aurora, at Brave curled up beside her, he realized he had been wrong. This wasn't just a rescue. This was a new beginning.
The snow fell relentlessly, covering the forest in a thick, white silence. Alone in the cold, a German shepherd named Bastian roamed with no destination, until he heard it. A faint whimper, barely audible through the howling wind. He turned, sniffed the air, and there, half buried in the snow, lay a tiny golden retriever puppy, shivering and bleeding, abandoned, helpless. And if Bastian walked away, the puppy wouldn't see another sunrise. But why was this little one left behind? And what Bastian didn't know, saving this puppy would change his life forever. The forest was silent, blanketed in an endless expanse of white. The sky, a dull shade of grey, stretched endlessly above, and the wind howled through the skeletal trees, whispering of an approaching storm. Snowflakes clung to the branches, piling higher with each passing moment, erasing footprints as if no living creature had ever walked here. Amid this frozen wilderness, a lone figure moved, Bastian, a 6-year-old German shepherd, his once strong frame now lean from months of survival. His black and deep tan coat was thick, but not enough to fully shield him from the piercing cold. Snow clung to his fur, melting against the heat of his body before freezing again, forming tiny icicles along the strands. His breath came out in visible puffs, and his amber eyes, once full of purpose, now held only exhaustion and quiet resilience. Bastian had not always been a stray. Once he had been a trained rescue dog, fearless and disciplined, working alongside humans to pull people from avalanches, collapsed buildings and disasters. He had been good at it, great even, but fate had other plans. A mission had gone wrong, a landslide, a fall, and then pain, so much pain. When he awoke, his leg had been broken, and by the time he healed, he was deemed unfit for duty. His human handler, whom he had trusted with his entire being, left him behind at a shelter. That was the day Bastian learned that even the most loyal hearts could be discarded. Since then, he had wandered from place to place, surviving on instinct alone. He had learned to hunt, to hide, to navigate the dangers of the wild. But as the storm thickened, even he knew the night would be merciless. The snow was falling harder now, the wind cutting through his thick coat like a blade. He needed shelter. Soon. Then he smelled it. Blood. Bastian's ears perked up, his nose twitching as he caught the unmistakable scent. It was faint, carried by the wind, but unmistakable. Something was bleeding nearby. Cautiously, he followed the scent, his paws sinking deep into the fresh snow. The trail led him past a cluster of barren trees, their twisted branches creaking under the weight of ice. His sharp eyes scanned ahead, and then he saw it, a small golden shape, barely visible against the snow. A puppy. The tiny creature lay motionless, its fragile body half buried beneath a thick layer of snow. A golden retriever, no more than 8 weeks old, its fur a soft golden cream, now damp and matted from the cold. Snowflakes clung to its delicate eyelashes, and its tiny chest rose and fell in weak, uneven breaths. Bastian approached carefully, lowering his nose to sniff. The pup's scent was faint, almost overwhelmed by the cold, but beneath it he could detect something else. Fear, hunger, loneliness. Then the puppy moved, just barely. A small whimper escaped its throat, and Bastian saw the source of the blood, a gash along the little one's front paw, likely from sharp ice or an animal attack. The pup was too young to be alone out here. No dog that small could have wandered this deep into the forest on its own. Had it been abandoned? Had its mother been lost? The thought unsettled Bastian in a way he couldn't explain. He hesitated, Survival had taught him not to get attached. In the wild, caring for another meant weakness, meant splitting food, meant slowing down. He could leave now, find shelter for himself, and let nature take its course. But as he stood there, looking down at the tiny, trembling form, something inside him stirred. A memory, long buried, of a time when he had been the one in need, injured and weak, waiting for someone to come for him. No one had. He would not let the same happen to this pup. With a deep exhale, Bastien lowered himself beside the puppy, curling his large body around the tiny form. His thick fur blocked the wind, and his warmth seeped into the shivering creature. The pup whimpered softly, but instinctively pressed into him, desperate for heat. Bastien did not know why he had chosen to stay. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was duty, or maybe, deep down, he was still a rescue dog, no matter what the world had told him. As the storm raged on, he tightened his body protectively around the pup, keeping it safe. For now, that was enough. The wind howled through the forest, carrying with it the sharp sting of ice and snow. The darkness thickened as night settled in, and the cold tightened its grip like an unforgiving predator. Beneath the towering trees, Bastien remained curled around the frail body of the golden retriever pup, shielding it from the relentless storm. The tiny creature barely moved, only letting out soft whimpers of pain as Bastien gently licked its injured paw, attempting to soothe the wound. The blood had begun to clot, but the pup was still weak, its body shuddering against the cold. Its round, golden-brown eyes peered up at him, wide and full of silent trust. That unwavering gaze unsettled Bastien, stirring something deep within him, an old instinct, a forgotten duty. It had been years since he had been a protector, a rescuer. But now, in the heart of this brutal winter, with no one else around, he was all this pup had. The cold was worsening, sinking into his bones, reminding him that staying in the open would mean certain death for the little one. He needed to find shelter, somewhere safe, somewhere warm, if such a place even existed in this unforgiving wilderness. He glanced around, his sharp eyes scanning the shadowy forest. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their leafless branches coated in frost, bending slightly under the weight of accumulating snow. In the distance, barely visible through the thick curtain of white, he spotted a massive oak tree, its roots twisting out of the ground, forming a small, hollowed-out space at its base. It wouldn't be much, but it was better than staying exposed. Determined, Bastien nudged the pup gently, urging it to move. The little one tried, shifting slightly but letting out a weak whine as pain shot through its injured leg. It wouldn't be able to walk on its own. Bastien lowered his head, using his powerful snout to push the pup forward, guiding it toward the tree. Step by step, he coaxed it along, his body blocking the wind as much as he could. The journey, though short, felt endless. Each step through the deep snow was exhausting, his paws sinking into the frozen ground. The pup stumbled, falling face first into the cold, but Bastien was there, lifting it with his nose, pushing it forward. They couldn't stop now. Finally, they reached the base of the great oak. The hollow beneath its roots was just large enough for them both. Bastien lowered himself inside first, curling up tightly before nudging the pup to nestle against his chest. The little one obeyed without hesitation, burrowing into his thick fur. Here, in this small refuge, the wind was muffled, and the snow could no longer bite at them. It wasn't perfect, but it was safe, for now. As Bastien settled in, his ears twitched, catching a sound beyond the whistling wind. A faint rustling, something moving through the snow. His body stiffened. He lifted his head, his ears standing erect, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the darkness. Something was out there, watching. Then he saw them, a pair of golden yellow eyes, glowing faintly against the blackness of the forest. They were fixed on him and the pup, unblinking, patient. Bastien's muscles tensed, his instincts sharpening. He knew those eyes. the slow, deliberate movements, the silent presence. It was a wolf. The creature stood just beyond the tree line, partially obscured by the falling snow. Its thick coat was a mix of silver and dark grey, blending seamlessly into the winter landscape. Tall and lean, yet powerful, its body was built for the wild. It was older, the streaks of white around its muzzle suggesting years of survival in the harsh wilderness. Its breath came in steady puffs of vapor, its posture relaxed but alert. Bastian did not move. He had encountered wolves before. Some were loners like him, avoiding conflict, while others ran in packs, territorial and ruthless. This one, however, stood alone. There was no aggressive posture, no immediate sign of hostility. The wolf simply observed. The pup, unaware of the silent tension, let out a tiny, pitiful whimper, pressing closer against Bastian's chest. The sound caused the wolf's ears to flick forward slightly, as if intrigued. Bastian lowered his head, his gaze never leaving the stranger. His body shielded the pup, muscles coiled, ready to fight if necessary. The wolf took a step forward, its massive paws pressing into the fresh snow without a sound. Bastian let out a low, quiet growl, a warning. He would not run. He would not let the pup be taken. For a moment, the two canines locked eyes, an unspoken understanding passing between them. There was something about this wolf, something familiar, though Bastian couldn't quite grasp why. A scent, faint, carried by the wind, triggered a distant memory, a flicker of recognition buried beneath years of hardship. But before he could process it, the wolf took a step back, then another, and then, just as silently as it had appeared, it turned and melted into the forest, its silver form vanishing into the storm. Bastian did not relax, not yet. He waited, listening, ensuring the wolf was truly gone. Only when he was satisfied that the presence had passed did he exhale slowly. The pup stirred against him, its small body trembling slightly in its sleep. Bastian lowered his head, nudging the little one gently with his nose before settling back down. The storm continued outside, the wind howling like the cries of lost souls. But inside their small shelter, there was warmth, there was protection, and, for the first time in a long time, there was something else. Bastian was not alone. The wind cut through the trees like a blade, carrying with it the sharp bite of ice and the distant howls of the storm. The darkness had thickened, swallowing the forest in an impenetrable void. Snowflakes whirled through the air, obscuring shapes and movements, but Bastian's eyes remained locked onto the golden stare of the wolf. His muscles tensed, his hackles raised, and a low, guttural growl rumbled deep in his throat. The wolf stood just beyond the edge of their meager shelter, its massive form barely visible against the white landscape. It was large, lean, but powerful, its coat a mixture of silver and charcoal, thick with the resilience of a creature born to survive the harsh wilderness. Its long legs moved effortlessly over the deep snow, paws silent as they pressed into the frozen earth. The wolf's breath curled into the cold air, visible in the dim light of the moon that occasionally broke through the storm clouds above. It did not lunge, did not snarl. It only watched. Bastian narrowed his eyes, his mind working through the strange familiarity he felt. He had encountered wolves before, had even fought them over food, over territory. But something about this one, something about its piercing gaze and its measured stillness felt different. A scent, faint but distinct, lingered in the air, triggering an old memory buried deep beneath layers of instinct and survival. He had known this scent once before. Before he could make sense of it, a soft whimper pulled his attention away. He turned, looking down to find the small golden retriever pup, struggling to move. The little one's tiny paws trembled against the frozen ground, its wounded leg refusing to support its weight. Its golden fur was damp with melting snow, the edges tinged with ice. The puppy's eyes, wide and desperate, flickered between Bastian and the shadowy wolf beyond. Fear, exhaustion, and confusion warred within its tiny body. But deep within those amber depths, there was something else. Determination. Bastien took a slow breath, his growl fading as he lowered his head and gently nudged the pup with his nose. "Get up." The pup let out another small whine, ears flattening against its skull, but it obeyed. It tried. Its first attempt was weak, a shaky movement that barely lifted its tiny frame. It collapsed almost instantly, panting hard, the pain in its leg too much to bear. Bastien did not move away. He stayed close, nudging again, encouraging. "Try again." A second attempt. This time, the pup managed to push itself upright, teetering on unsteady legs. It wobbled, nearly falling again, but Bastien pressed his side against it, lending his warmth and support. Slowly, carefully, the pup balanced itself. Its wounded paw curled slightly off the ground, unable to bear weight, but it remained standing. Its tail, previously tucked tight beneath its belly, gave a small, hopeful wag. Bastien let out a soft huff, a quiet approval. Good. The pup had to be strong if it wanted to survive. The storm was worsening, the snow thickening. They could not stay here. His eyes flicked back to the wolf, which still had not moved. It remained at the edge of the clearing, its presence both unsettling and oddly reassuring. Bastien had expected it to attack, to challenge him for dominance, to take the pup as easy prey. But it did none of those things. Instead, it watched, waiting. A gust of wind sent a fresh wave of snow cascading through the trees, momentarily obscuring everything. When the flurry passed, the wolf was gone. Bastien's ears flicked forward, his nose testing the air. The scent was still there, faint, lingering in the snow, but the creature had disappeared into the night. He did not know if it would return, but he knew one thing. They needed to leave. The pup, still leaning against him for warmth, let out a small, uncertain whimper. "Where do we go?" Bastien did not have an answer. He had no home, no pack, no one waiting for him beyond this frozen wilderness. But he could not let the pup die here. With a slow inhale, he turned toward the deeper part of the forest. The snow stretched endlessly, a vast expanse of white and shadow. Somewhere beyond it lay safety, food, warmth, shelter. He had no clear destination, but his instincts urged him forward. With a final glance at the empty darkness where the wolf had been, Bastien took his first step into the night, the pup limping beside him. The night stretched on, an unrelenting darkness swallowing the forest. Snowflakes fell in a silent flurry, their weight growing heavier, clinging to every branch and blade of frozen grass. The wind no longer howled. Instead, it had settled into a chilling whisper, wrapping around everything like an invisible predator, watching, waiting. Each step Bastien took felt slower, heavier. His legs burned from trudging through the thick snow, and exhaustion gnawed at his muscles, but he couldn't stop. The little pup beside him needed to keep moving. Hope limped at his side, each shaky step a testament to its quiet determination. The pup's small frame was barely visible against the snow, its golden fur dulled by the frost clinging to it. Its injured paw barely touched the ground, making its movements awkward. But it pressed on, its breaths coming in soft, uneven puffs. Bastien glanced at the pup, then at the endless whiteness ahead. They couldn't survive much longer out here. Then, through the dense, suffocating silence, Bastien caught a scent, faint but distinct. Wood. Old, damp, and rotting beneath layers of ice and time. His ears twitched as he lifted his nose, inhaling deeper. Shelter. He turned slightly, shifting his course, guiding the pup toward the scent. The snowdrifts grew deeper, forcing them to push harder, but Bastien's resolve had sharpened. There was something ahead. And soon, through the thickening snowfall, he saw it. A shadow against the white, barely visible at first, but unmistakable. An old cabin, standing alone in the heart of the wilderness. The structure had been left to the mercy of nature long ago. Its wooden walls were warped, some planks missing, exposing the inside to the bitter air. The roof sagged in places, heavy with snow, and the windows were dark, shattered in some spots. It had once been a home, but now it was just a carcass, forgotten and broken. Still, it was something. Bastian approached cautiously, ears perked, nose twitching. There was no fresh human scent, no signs of recent life, just decay, dust, and the whisper of something long abandoned. He pressed forward, sniffing at the door, a wooden frame that had been left slightly ajar, its hinges rusted and weak. With a firm push of his muzzle, it creaked open, revealing the darkness inside. The cabin smelled of damp wood, old ashes, and time itself. The floor was layered with dust, disturbed only by the scurrying feet of past rodents and the weight of snow that had crept in through cracks in the walls. A broken table lay overturned in one corner, its legs snapped. An old fireplace, its bricks blackened with soot, stood against the far wall, though it had not seen fire in years. Bastian scanned the space, his sharp eyes adjusting to the dimness. No immediate threats. That was good. He stepped inside, the wooden floor groaning faintly beneath his weight, then turned back toward Hope. The pup hesitated at the threshold, its small body shivering as it stared into the darkness. Perhaps in its short life it had never seen a place like this, a place stripped of warmth and life, filled with nothing but the echoes of what used to be. But it was better than freezing in the open. Bastian gave a low huff, nudging the pup forward with his snout. Hope stepped inside. The little one immediately sought warmth, curling against Bastian's side as soon as they settled near the fireplace. There was no fire, only cold stone, but at least here the wind couldn't reach them. The pup pressed in close, its trembling gradually easing as Bastian's thick fur shielded it from the worst of the chill. For a long moment there was nothing but the sound of their breathing, the distant creaks of the old structure, adjusting under the weight of the storm outside. Bastian lay still, his body curled protectively around the pup, but his mind was far from quiet. Once he had known homes like this, warmth, crackling fires, a thick blanket laid out for him, his owner's hands rubbing over his fur, whispering words he no longer heard, but still remembered the feeling of. Nights spent resting beside a trusted companion, knowing he was valued, needed. He had slept by fires like these, but back then there had been light, there had been laughter, there had been someone who cared. Now there was only emptiness. The pup stirred slightly, pressing its nose into Bastian's fur with a soft sigh. For it, this was not a home, nor a memory. It was only the present, cold, uncertain, but safe for now. Bastian exhaled slowly, pushing the past away. This was not then. This was now. He had to focus. His ears flicked. The wind had changed. A faint sound outside, barely there, but something. A crunch in the snow, distant but measured, not the storm, not the trees, a presence. His body tensed. Carefully he lifted his head, his eyes narrowing as he listened. The pup remained still, unaware, lost in the exhaustion of the night. The sound did not come again, but the feeling of being watched did. His thoughts flickered back to the wolf, the way it had observed them without moving, the familiarity that had tugged at the edges of his memory, a scent he almost recognized but could not place. Was it still out there? Bastian didn't know, but he did not sleep that night. He kept watch, his ears alert, his gaze locked on the doorway, waiting for whatever was out there in the dark. The morning came, but it brought no relief. The storm had not passed, and the world outside remained buried beneath a thick, merciless white. The trees stood stiff, their branches laden with snow, their roots hidden under an icy shroud. The wind still whispered through the cracks in the cabin's walls, a haunting, endless murmur. It was as if winter itself refused to loosen its grip. Inside, Bastian lay awake, his ears twitching at every shift in the wind. He had not slept. Even as exhaustion pulled at his limbs, something in him had remained alert, guarding the fragile warmth that had settled against his body. The pup, Hope, slept fitfully, its tiny body still weak, but its breathing steady. But now it was awake. Hope stirred, letting out a small whimper, its golden fur matted from the night's cold. Then another sound, softer, weaker, a low, pitiful rumble from its belly. Hunger. Bastian exhaled, his breath curling into the frosty air. He knew that feeling well. Hunger was a constant companion to a stray. He had endured it countless times, but this pup was too small, too fragile. It would not last long without food. He needed to do something. Rising to his feet, he shook the stiffness from his muscles and padded toward the broken door. The outside world was blinding, an expanse of untouched white stretching in every direction. The storm had slowed, but it had not yet relented. Visibility was better than the night before, but it was still a graveyard of snow and silence. Hunting would be difficult. There were no fresh scents of prey, no signs of movement beyond the occasional shifting of branches. Even scavenging would be near impossible in this frozen wasteland. And then, he realized, this pup needed more than just food. It needed real help, a human. Bastian's instincts rebelled at the thought. He had learned the hard way that humans could not always be trusted. They had abandoned him. They had thrown him aside when he was no longer useful. But despite everything, he still knew one truth. Humans meant warmth, shelter, food, and Hope needed all three, so he did the only thing he could. He threw his head back and barked, a single, deep, commanding bark that echoed into the quiet morning. It rang through the trees, bouncing off the frozen trunks, cutting through the stillness like a call into the void. If there was anyone out there, if there was any chance of help, this was it. Far beyond the trees, in the outskirts of a small town near the forest's edge, a man stood outside his cabin, bundled in a heavy coat, a scarf wrapped tightly around his neck. Elias. He was tall, broad-shouldered, though slightly hunched from years of weight he no longer carried physically, but still bore in his soul. His hair was dark with streaks of grey, a sign of both age and sorrow, of a life once full, but now reduced to a slow, solitary existence. His eyes, a deep brown once filled with warmth, now held a distant emptiness, as if he spent every day walking through a fog of memories that refused to fade. Elias had not always been alone. Once he had a wife, a daughter, a family, a life that had meant something. A home filled with laughter, filled with love. But it had all been taken from him in a single, cruel instant. The accident had happened on a night not so different from this one, a blizzard, an icy road, a loss of control. He remembered the way the headlights had flickered, the way the world had spun, and then darkness. When he woke, everything was gone. He had survived. But he had not lived since that day. Now he existed in this cabin at the edge of the forest, away from the world that moved on without him. He spent his days wandering the woods, chasing ghosts, trying to outrun the silence in his heart. And then he heard it, the bark. He froze, his breath forming a small cloud in the cold air. His heart clenched at the sound, a sound he had not heard in years. There was something about it, something familiar, something that sent a shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Elias had owned dogs once, had trained them, had loved them, but that was a lifetime ago. This bark, though, it called to him. He hesitated, torn between the comfort of staying inside and the nagging pull of curiosity that was already dragging him toward the tree line. His logical mind told him to ignore it. Wild dogs, stray animals, there were plenty in the woods. But his heart whispered something else. Go. Before he could change his mind, he grabbed his thick coat, his gloves, his flashlight. The air was freezing the moment he stepped into the forest, his boots crunching against the snow. The sound felt deafening against the stillness. The bark had come from deeper within the woods. With each step, he felt his pulse quicken, a strange anticipation growing in his chest. The further he went, the more his memories stirred, the weight of the past pressing down, pulling him back to a time when he had belonged to something greater than himself. Another bark, closer this time. He adjusted his grip on the flashlight, the beam of light cutting through the white abyss ahead. His breath was shallow now, and his mind raced with possibilities. And then he saw tracks, paw prints, large ones, deep, a dog. The beam of the flashlight cut through the thick snowfall, illuminating two figures huddled in the cold. Elias took slow, cautious steps forward, his breath shallow as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. A German shepherd, its fur matted with ice, its body leaner than it should have been, stood in front of a tiny, golden-furred pup. Both were exhausted, their bodies stiff from the cold, yet the shepherd still stood protectively, positioning itself between Elias and the pup. Elias felt his heart slam against his ribs. He knew this dog. His fingers trembled around the flashlight, the wind howling around him as if urging him forward, demanding that he acknowledge what stood before him. "No, it can't be." The words barely left his lips, carried away by the wind, but the shepherd heard them. The dog's ears flicked, its amber eyes locking onto him, recognition flickering in their depths like embers that had not quite died out. A long-forgotten connection, a thread woven into the past, suddenly pulled taut. Elias took another step closer, his boots crunching against the frozen ground. His pulse roared in his ears. Could it really be him? Could this be the very same dog that had once run beside him through wreckage and ruin searching for survivors? Bastian! The name barely came out as a whisper, yet it carried years of loss, guilt, and something deeper, hope. At the sound of his name, Bastian did not move immediately. He only stared. His intelligent eyes, once filled with unshakable trust in his handler, now held wariness, hesitation. Years of abandonment had made him cautious, had built walls around the part of him that once relied on humans, and yet something in him still recognized this man. Elias inhaled sharply, his mind drowning in the flood of memories. 5 years ago, the rescue mission, the landslide, the chaos. He remembered the desperate scramble to reach the trapped survivors, the way the earth had given way beneath them. Bastian had been beside him, as he always was, moving with instinctive precision, and then the world had collapsed. Elias had been dragged back by his team, forced to retreat as the unstable ground crumbled beneath them. The last thing he had seen was Bastian, buried beneath debris, his desperate eyes locking onto Elias before everything went dark. He had searched. My God, he had searched. For weeks he had returned to the site, calling Bastian's name, combing through the ruins, refusing to believe that his partner, his friend, was gone. But there had been nothing. No tracks, no body, no sign that Bastian had ever made it out alive. And in the end, he had been forced to accept the unbearable truth. Bastian was gone, but now he wasn't. Elias took another step forward, his throat tightening, his eyes burning against the cold. "You're alive." His voice broke slightly, as if saying it aloud made it more real, more impossible. Bastian's muscles tensed, his instincts screaming at him to run, to not trust, to not be fooled again. But he didn't move. His breath was slow, visible in the freezing air, his body rigid, yet his eyes never left Elias. The pup, still weak, whimpered softly, breaking the silence. Bastian flicked his gaze down at it briefly, then back to Elias. Protecting it was his priority. Trusting this man from his past, that was another matter entirely. Elias knelt in the snow, his flashlight angled downward, casting softer shadows. He did not reach out, did not make a sudden move. He knew better. Instead, he studied Bastian closely, taking in the scars, the hardened muscle beneath his thick coat, the way his ribs were barely concealed beneath the fur. This was not the same Bastian he had lost. This was a dog who had survived things Elias could never imagine. "You remember me, don't you?" Elias murmured. Bastian's ears twitched. His tail, once a proud banner of loyalty, remained still. Elias felt the weight of 5 years pressing on his chest, heavy and suffocating. "I looked for you," he said, his voice rough. "I never stopped looking." The word stirred something in Bastian, a memory, a feeling. He had waited once, waited at the site of the disaster, buried beneath rubble, his body aching, his instincts screaming at him to move, to survive. But he had waited because he had believed that Elias would come back, but he never had. And so Bastian had left, had wandered, had learned that the world was cruel, that loyalty could be a chain, that hope was a dangerous thing. Now, as he stood before the man he had once followed without question, he felt the remnants of something he thought he had buried long ago. Elias watched him, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists to stop them from trembling. "Come with me," he said finally. "I can help you, both of you." His eyes flickered toward the pup, who was struggling to stay upright. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." Bastian did not move. Trust was not something easily rebuilt. But as the wind howled through the trees and the storm threatened to return, a single thought echoed in his mind. Hope. He glanced down at the tiny pup, at the fragile life he had protected, then back at Elias. The past had abandoned him, but maybe, just maybe, the future wouldn't. The drive back to Elias's cabin was slow, the snow-covered roads winding through the dense forest like a frozen river. The storm had finally begun to weaken, but the air remained bitterly cold, and the night loomed over them like a silent observer. Inside the truck, the warmth from the heater gradually seeped into the worn leather seats, offering a stark contrast to the freezing world outside. Bastian lay curled up in the back seat, his body tense despite the heat. His dark eyes flickered between the passing trees outside and the man behind the wheel. It felt foreign, this enclosed space, the steady hum of an engine beneath him, the familiar scent of human presence. It had been so long since he had been anywhere but the open wilderness, where every step was uncertain, every meal a fight, and every night a battle against the cold. Hope, on the other hand, had settled against Bastian's side, its tiny body completely relaxed. The pup had no hesitations, no fear. It had known nothing but struggle in its short life, yet it seemed to trust so easily. Bastian couldn't decide if that was foolish or brave. At the front of the truck, Elias drove in silence, his fingers gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. He wasn't sure how to process the fact that Bastian, his Bastian, was here, alive after all these years. The dog beside him was not the same young, fearless rescue dog that had once raced through disaster zones, pulling people from rubble with unshakable loyalty. This Bastian was older, his body leaner, his fur rougher, but his eyes were the same. Elias took a slow breath. His cabin wasn't far now. He glanced at the rearview mirror, watching the way Bastian kept his gaze locked on him, guarded yet curious. "You still don't trust me, do you?" he murmured, though he didn't expect an answer. Bastian only blinked. Elias sighed and turned his eyes back to the road. He couldn't blame him. The drive continued in silence until, at last, the cabin came into view. It was small but sturdy, built from dark wooden logs nestled between towering pines. A faint glow from the porch light cast warm shadows against the snow, making it look almost inviting. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, the promise of warmth and shelter lingering in the air. Elias pulled up near the entrance, shifting the truck into park. "We're home," he said softly. Bastian didn't move immediately. His muscles remained tense, his ears twitching as he took in the unfamiliar surroundings. The smell of burning wood from the fireplace drifted through the cold air, mingling with the faint traces of pine and something distinctly human. Hope, however, had no such reservations. The pup let out an excited yip, wriggling from Bastian's side and tumbling into the front seat. Its tail wagged furiously as it pawed at the door, eager to escape the confines of the truck. Elias chuckled, shaking his head. All right, hold on." He pushed the door open, stepping out into the cold. His boots crunched against the snow as he rounded the truck to open the back door. Hope leaped out first, landing awkwardly in the deep snow before bounding toward the cabin. Bastian, however, remained where he was, watching Elias carefully. "Come on, boy," Elias said, his voice softer now. There was no command in his tone, no expectation, only an offering. For a long moment, Bastien did nothing. Then, slowly, he stood, stepping out of the truck with measured movements. His paws sank into the snow, the chill biting at his pads, but he ignored it. His eyes remained locked on Elias as he followed him towards the cabin. Inside, the warmth was immediate. The heat from the stone fireplace spread through the cozy space, casting flickering golden light against the wooden walls. The cabin was simple, lived in. A worn couch sat near the fireplace, draped with an old wool blanket. A sturdy wooden table stood in the corner, cluttered with books, papers, and a half-finished mug of coffee, long gone cold. Shelves lined the walls, filled with small trinkets, old photographs, and remnants of a life once full. Hope wasted no time. The pup raced across the room, its tiny paws sliding against the wooden floor before collapsing into a heap near the fireplace. It let out a content sigh, curling up instantly. Elias smiled, shaking his head. "Guess you found your spot." Then he turned back to Bastien. The shepherd had stopped just past the threshold, his large frame tense as he took in the space. His ears flicked, his nose twitching as he absorbed the warmth, the scents, the sheer foreignness of it all. For years, his world had been nothing but open sky and endless road, a life of solitude and survival. This was different. The air here was thick with old memories, the echoes of human presence pressing against him from every angle. Elias set his gloves on the table and knelt down beside him. Slowly, cautiously, he reached out and placed his hand on Bastien's head. "I'm sorry," Elias said, his voice quiet. "I should have found you sooner, buddy." Bastien did not pull away. He did not move at all. And then, for the first time since stepping into the cabin, he relaxed. His body eased, the tension slowly unwinding from his muscles as he let out a deep breath. His ears lowered slightly, no longer standing at full attention. He stepped forward, padding toward the fireplace where Hope was already drifting into sleep. With a slow, careful movement, Bastien lay down beside the pup. Elias watched them for a moment, a lump forming in his throat. The past had taken so much from him. He had spent years believing he had lost everything, that there was nothing left for him in this world. But now, sitting in front of him, was something he never thought he would have again. A second chance, a family. Bastien let out a small sigh, closing his eyes as the warmth of the fire seeped into his weary body. Hope, sensing his presence, shifted in its sleep, pressing closer to Bastien's side. The shepherd did not move away. Elias exhaled slowly, then reached for the old wool blanket draped over the couch. He unfolded it and gently placed it over both dogs, watching as the firelight flickered across their resting forms. Outside, the storm had finally passed. For the first time in 5 years, Bastien was not astray. He was not lost. He was home.